Please share where you're watching from and consider subscribing to the channel. I grew up hiking the Smokies with my older brother. We're not experts, but we're not the kind of people who confuse a deer track with a dog print or think a ridge is just a hill with PR. We know how fast light drops under a hardwood canopy in late October, how sound rides a creek like it's on rails, and how the air changes on your skin when the hollow starts drinking the day. We've done Cades Cove enough times to predict where traffic bunches and where the deer cross, which bathrooms will be out of paper by noon, and which pullouts have just enough signal to tempt your worst habits. We were staying outside Townsend for a long weekend. Cheap cabin, wobbly porch, wood smoke that clung to your jacket longer than it had any right to. The plan was to unplug after a rough year, so we leaned into the Luddite cosplay. Phones left behind on purpose. Mine on the nightstand, his in the glove box, both switched off so the part of your brain that listens for a vibration can finally go quiet. 2 headlamps, fresh batteries. A small first aid kit with real tape, not the joke kind. Water. 1 can of bear spray clipped to my belt, because routine is a talisman. Familiar and safe, we said, which the mountains always hear as an invitation. We pulled into the Abrams Falls trailhead late afternoon. The parking area had that tired light, gold thinning to pewter, leaves crisping under tires. Volunteer at the signboard, gray braid, neat jacket, eyes that had seen every kind of hiker. She smiled like she'd practiced, not sounding like a broken record. Bears active near the creek, she said. Turn around if you're still on the trail at dusk. Rocks by the falls are slick. Drowning isn't dramatic, it's quiet. Then she tapped the drowning hazard sign with her pen and asked us to sign in. We wrote our names and the time with block letters like it mattered. Sign back out, she said. We promised we would. The trail-in was the Smokies' greatest hits. Packed leaves over hard dirt, roots like ribs underfoot, hemlock and laurel crowding the blind corners. Abrams Creek to our right, sounding bigger than it looks, all that water noise folding into itself. The maples were on fire, the oaks were stubbornly orange, the air had that cool sweetness you only get when fall is exact. Foot logs over side streams, a few muddy detours, the brother pace settling in. 2 people who've moved together long enough that you could switch off the lights and still not step on each other. We reached the falls in under an hour. They were throwing off a steady column, spray hanging over the pool like breath. We ate a bar each, drank water, did nothing important. Downstream, a sour smell rode the air, not rot exactly, more like fish left in the sun just long enough to go wrong. I walked 30 feet to answer it and found a trout split clean on one side, untouched on the other, laid on a flat rock like a tool set out for later use. The rock was dry, only a damp circle under the fish. Bear, I said, because saying a word can tidy the universe. My brother said the same, because that's how you agree to let a thing slide past you. We didn't take pictures. We didn't have phones. We should have been grateful. We started back. On the return, the grade always feels steeper. The creek swaps sides, and so does your confidence. Gold goes gray goes gone fast there. I zipped my shell when the air edged toward wet. Somewhere above the switchbacks, the leaf crunch under our boots softened like somebody had laid a film over the trail. The smell came back, sour, animal, a cold metal tang underneath it. I turned to make a joke, and a uniform stepped out of the rhododendron. First glance, ranger. Brimmed hat, jacket, duty belt with a radio, the posture of someone who tells people to leash their dogs and means it. Face you don't register, neither friendly nor unfriendly, perfectly neutral like a default setting. Loop road's closing soon, he said. Gate crew doesn't like cars sitting after dark. He offered a shortcut, parallels the creek, shaves 20 minutes, then pointed at a faint path angling off the main track. His badge was caked in dried mud. His boots were bone dry. The trail under our feet wasn't. Questions queued in my head. Where does it rejoin? Is there a blowdown? What marker do we look for? But he was already stepping onto the path and telling us to walk single file for safety, which sounded routine enough that my brain let it through. My brother shrugged, still our decision, and the 3 of us slotted in. Him, me, my brother, footprints folding into a narrow ribbon of dirt. At first the sound of the creek stayed loyal on our left, and I tried to file the dry boots under meaningless detail. He walked with his hands close to his sides, arms barely swinging. He moved quiet for a big-ish guy, and not stealthy quiet, light like he weighed less than he should. Branch tips that scraped my sleeve didn't seem to touch him. My brother cracked a line about getting a ticket for hiking at dusk. The man repeated the punchline a beat later in the same tone, like he was testing the shape of the words. I've seen enough uniforms to pick up tells. He never asked where we were parked. Never checked our names against the sheet. Never tossed the specific safety rules you hear like gospel at every trailhead. The radio on his belt never whispered static. He called the volunteer the woman at the board, like he'd seen her without knowing her. And the biggest tell, he kept getting ahead of us without passing. We'd round a bend, and he'd be 10 yards farther than his pace allowed, like the trail stretched between us when we blinked. The shortcut started to drift away from the water. If you know Abrams, you know the creek is your North Star. Lose that sound, and the laurel closes in until every corridor looks like every other. I mentioned it too casually, and he said the path would cut back, same flat voice, head barely turning, hips steering more than shoulders. At a spot where the path split into 2 ruts and rejoined 20 feet ahead, I saw something that doesn't sit right even now. As he stepped into the split, his outline widened, then doubled for half a breath. 2 bodies overlapped and then sealed into one. You can explain a lot in low light. Your eyes hunt contrast and invent edges. I didn't say anything. My brother's fingers found my sleeve and squeezed once. Agreement without a meeting. We didn't need a plan spelled. First familiar landmark, first honest signal from the creek, break and run. I slid the bear spray free and thumbed the safety. The smell thickened, wet animal, fish cleaning sharp, camp pile under a board. The path cinched until we turned sideways. He halted and pointed through a black slot between hemlocks. Cut goes straight up to the loop road shoulder, he said. From the gap he chose, I heard water off to the left, not ahead. It didn't match. We moved together without announcing it, hard left toward the sound. Brush clawed at our calves. The ground dropped faster than our feet wanted. It wasn't athletic, it was stubborn and ugly. Slide, correct, slide. We burst onto a little bench above the bank, and he came behind us. Steady steps, branches parting, no voice telling us to stop. We hit the water without counting to 3, because counting gives doubt a handle. Cold clamped our shins. Rocks slippery with leaf slime rolled a fraction under each step. I grabbed my brother's pack strap and kept us knotted. On the bank, something paced us step for step. Not crashing, not stalking, mirroring. When we slipped, it paused. When we moved, it moved. Halfway across, my brother went to a knee. I hauled him up and a hand touched his shoulder from behind. Skin like riverstone in shade. Fingers long enough to feel wrong. Cold that burned. We scrambled the last yards. Gravel rose under our boots. We turned because you have to look at the thing you fear once to make it real. On the far bank, the figure crouched, hat gone or never real, jacket hanging wrong like it was a size off in 3 directions. It leaned too far forward, past where a spine lets you live. It didn't step into the water. It tilted its head, measuring, then sank back on its haunches. A beam cut across our faces. "Hey!" a woman's voice said, clear, worried, not theatrical. The volunteer from the board. Breath short. Flashlight held low and steady like she'd been moving with purpose, not panic. "You the 2 brothers from the Abrams sign-in?" We said yes. "Where'd you come from?" "Main trail's 20 yards right." We told her shortcut, ranger, single file. She didn't look across the creek. She kept the light on roots and rocks and told us to move. She didn't turn her back on the water until we were on the tread. At the lot, a real ranger waited in a reflective vest. Radio chirped with a living channel. He sat us on his bumper, took our names, and let us talk once. Fish on a dry rock. Muddy badge. Dry boots. Path that drifted from the creek. The doubling. The crossing. The hand. No smile. No story to tuck us in. He just wrote. He thanked the volunteer for coming when we didn't sign out. He said no one on duty matched that description. He said there'd been odd reports along that stretch, usually filed under turned around at dusk. He asked us to come at 9 the next morning to see something. We slept badly. That's on us. Every ridge noise became deliberate. Morning, back at the trail, he walked us to a muddy seep where the tread narrows. Crouched. Pointed. Prints that began like boot soles with smooth, template treads, then widened, lost the heel to toe, then went bare long, no arch, toes wrong. They trailed to the waterline and ended. He didn't explain them. He didn't have to. On the way out of Townsend, my brother said the word like a dare, Skinwalker. I didn't argue definitions. Names are handles, and sometimes a handle helps you put a box on a thing you don't want to carry loose. We don't hike after 3 in the Smokies now. 2 headlamps, 2 cans of spray. We sign in and out like it's church. When people ask, we say we had a scare. If they press, we tell the true part that fits in daylight. A man who wasn't a ranger tried to walk us off the trail. The rest can stay where it belongs, on the far bank, crouched at the line where the water starts. We kept our line. We didn't run. We didn't stop. He vanished into the fringe where water crossed under the road, and then reappeared at the next culvert mouth like the drainage was a hallway, and he knew the doors. Each time, he was aligned with the pipe, not winded, not sweating in cold that had put a fine salt crust on my hat. I tried to logic it, cut through game trails, little driveways to old plots, anything. But each crossing had the same geometry, and geometry doesn't care about the story you want. We made a plan at normal volume, because panic fogs thinking. If he pushed in on us, Jared would lay a wide fan of spray between us and him, accept the blowback, and we'd cut cross-slope through brush to regain the road beyond the choke. If you're choosing between burning eyes and a close pass beside a culvert mouth, you choose pain and space. We kept scanning for problems ahead, so we weren't choosing blind. The problem found us. We rounded a bend and hit fresh stormfall, a tangle of branches and trunks that had ridden down from upslope and stopped where the road pinched between banks. You could scramble it, but slowly, and it forced you to the edges where the ditches deepened. Beyond the tangle, on the open gravel, stood the man in the gray hoodie and brimmed hat. The hoodie hung wrong across the shoulders, like someone had put a broader hanger under a narrow shirt. We checked the wind. Not in our favor. It skated back and forth in the corridor and would push spray into our own faces. We accepted it. Counting helps commit. 3, Jared said. 2, I said. 1, Tessa said. Jared raised the can and drew an orange fog across the gap, a curtain more than a line. We went left into the brush as a knot. Thorns did what thorns do. Luke leaned between us and kept his feet under him. The spray blew back, eyes, nose, throat, cutting tears into the cold. We didn't stop to sputter. I held our angle by sound, keeping my left shoulder to the tiny runnel that fed the culvert, so we wouldn't drift into the drainage we were trying to avoid. The only words were terrain calls. Log. Dip. Step. We hit gravel like we'd broken a tape, and didn't look back because looking back doesn't change rocks underfoot. The lot showed through the bare trees, kiosk roof, a white truck, distance that made sense again. The door of the truck opened, and a ranger stepped down. Reflective vest. Radio already chirping with a live channel. He didn't crack a joke or make us feel small. He asked if anyone was hurt. He asked the right short questions. Where did you see him? What exactly did he say? Which culverts? What did the card look like? We kept it to facts. Hat on a branch with seams cut and sewn. Deer hairline. Scratch marks too high. Stormfall choke. Spray. Our line through the brush. He wrote, nodded once, and said we weren't the first to talk about a copycat hiker after leaf drop. No spooky vocabulary. Just that phrasing, copycat hiker. He said he'd hike that stretch in daylight, check for downed trees, document sign damage. He gave us an incident number and told us to keep Luke's ankle elevated that night. The next afternoon a message came through the park kiosk system. I read it twice. They found deep scratches on a saddle trail sign about 8 feet up. Higher than usual wildlife reach was the phrase, and a brimmed hat in brush with the crown seams cut and resewn wider. They'd cleared the jam across the road. Thank you for reporting. Case number. That was it. No story to fold this into, just details that fit under daylight. Luke's ankle ballooned that night, then settled over the week. He jokes now he's retired from the scramble. We still hike, because that's who we are, but we changed our rules. Dusk is a hard cutoff, not a suggestion. If one of us says turn around, we turn around. We stay in the center of the fire road when someone is shadowing us, and we don't walk the edges where culverts mouth open. And we don't go back to old rag in the shoulder season. Not because the mountain is cursed. Because something out there wanted to be closer than we were willing to let it be, and we listened to our own boring plan instead. If you hike old rag in November, and a man in a gray hoodie with a brimmed hat shows up ahead of you without ever passing, don't be polite about space. Keep your people in the middle of the road. Keep moving. If you have to make a cloud that burns to buy a lane, make it. And to the copycat hiker who offered to carry our friend on Weekly Hollow Fire Road, let's not meet. I guide a few trips every summer in the Boundary Waters, and I've done enough cold shoulder runs in October to know where the light drains first and what a north wind can do to your judgment. This wasn't a rookie thing. My buddy Matt and I planned a tidy loop that would land us at the public landing off the end of the Gunflint Trail before truly dark. 2 short carries, then a long last push-across knife. Phones stayed locked in the truck on purpose. Paper map in a zip bag, real compass, 2 headlamps, an ultralight pack, and a Kevlar canoe with everything lashed down so a bad wave wouldn't yard sail our lives. Nights had already slipped below freezing that week. The kind of cold where you mind your socks the way you mind your fingers. By mid-afternoon the lake went flat and dark, that deceptive flat that makes you think you've been given a free mile. If you paddle here late in October, remember this part. Free miles always collect interest. We cut a long diagonal from west to east, about pointed at the south arm. I kept my cadence low and even, bent just enough at the waist to make the boat feel like it was cutting with its own intention. Thunder Point slid past without the usual stop. We told ourselves we were skipping the overlook for time, but the truth is the landing pulls harder than a view when the air gets glass brittle. We drifted by a campsite that didn't fit. 10 feet up a birch, somebody had lashed a straight sapling to the trunk. From it hung scraps of fur, a length of cord, and a row of old bottle caps punched and wired like crude bells. The caps were matte, not new, the fur not deer hair. Too neat, too high, and nowhere near an obvious trail. I made a light pencil dash on the map's border where the campsite would sit. Not a mark for later like a tourist. A mark because that's what you do with details you don't want to argue with yourself about later. We hit the first carry with time to spare. Locals call it a liftoff more than a portage. Matt took the canoe, I took the pack. Narrow ribbon of dirt and roots, the kind of path your ankles memorize. Maybe 20 steps in, something moved in the brush on both sides of the trail. Not crashing, placed, pacing. When we stopped, it stopped. When we started, it waited half a beat like it wanted to get the rhythm right before it joined us. That pattern tells you more than prints ever do. On a bend, a birch had a wide strip of bark peeled back, fresh enough to show pale flesh underneath. For divots pressed into the exposed layer like fingertips had punched straight through. The spacing wasn't human. I pressed my own finger near one. The hole was narrower and deeper than I could make, and I'm not slight. We didn't talk it to death there. We shouldered through and slid into otter track clean. Something moved with us on that lake. It kept pace tucked in the edge like it respected a line you couldn't see. In that still, cold air you can hear a deer splash from a long way out. There was no splash. We'd round a point of land, and there it would be again ahead of us, like it had cut across with private rights to some route we didn't know. You tell yourself a runner on a game trail, a wolf curious enough to parallel a canoe. But runners have shoulders and hips that show their work, and wolves have a gait that lets you name it at once if you've spent any time out here. This wasn't that. We aimed the bow for Monument Portage. In summer, the stone markers stand like promises and boot prints keep you company. In late October, it's a hallway with old stories and no one using it. We pushed up the steep pull from the otter track side, breath white and heavier than we wanted to admit. The pacing returned on the carry, left and right, just inside brush line, heavy enough to move berry canes, not small. At the top it drops toward the other side. That's when a voice came from the last campsite, the one closest to the landing. "Hey," it called level and ordinary. "You two headed across? I could use a ride before dark." Words you've heard 100 times up here in July. We edged the canoe toward the landing because habit is a powerful animal. The figure stood back from the water 10 paces, neutral as a fence post. When my headlamp edge brushed his face, the features looked arranged more than grown. Eyes a fraction too far apart, like a taxidermy job done from memory. Teeth too even, squared like identical blocks. A smile appeared and then didn't fade. It vanished, like it had been toggled. Cheeks never joined it when it was there. Matt said one word under his breath, a word I don't use when I'm sleeping in canvas with miles of brush between me and anyone else. He said it anyway. The change was instant. The posture went from still to alert with no weight shift between, like someone cut frames out of a film. We back-paddled twice and set a diagonal out, a clean line that would put us on the open water of Swamp Lake and then the narrow run toward the public landing. Open water is the only ground a canoe can make that a fast runner can't steal back in brush. That was the whole plan. Shore is shortcuts. The lake is geometry. It read our angle immediately. Along the ridge on the north bank, it moved faster than a person should be able to. Upright, it had a human outline. Dropping to all fours, the gait changed into long, clean arcs that didn't look like hands and feet should be able to do that on rock. A small north wind laid a short chop across the surface, nuisance for a boat, but on slick shoreline that chop means wet lichen and slower footing. I kept cadence steady, counting strokes the way you count when fear wants to make you hurry, and hurry would ruin your line. We had one thing to throw. The food bag hung from a carabiner on top of the pack, so we could pull it fast at camp. I yanked, hooked fingers in the webbing, and lobbed it high toward shore to make noise and smell in the same breath. It arced and thumped into brush. The runner stopped like it had been checked on a line. It bent forward at the waist and stayed too long in that angle. Then it raised its head like it was smelling. In that air, anything pulling breath throws vapor. Nothing. No frost cloud, no shoulder rise under the jacket. The posture of an animal taking in scent, with none of the simple proof. We kept the diagonal. The landing showed as a dark scab of gravel backed by timber and a stump. An old aluminum skiff lay there chained with a rusted length of link. We rode the last little break and shoved the bow up enough to let Matt get out first. We both hauled the canoe past the first lip of shore. A light swung and held, not blinding, just firm. "You boys okay?" The voice came from an older man in a canvas coat, flashlight held up near his shoulder the way people hold a phone. I heard judgment in his silence more than his words. He was measuring us for whether we knew the basics. I didn't answer his question. "Can you give us a ride up the road?" was what fell out of my mouth. He didn't make it a conversation. He hooked our canoe to a small trailer with hands that had done exactly that in exactly that light 100 times. "You can warm up at my place," he said. "It's close." His lodge sat back from the little road, behind scrub and rock. An office sign with more winters than paint. No check-in. No credit card. He brought us inside, flipped lights, locked the front door with a motion that was habit, not drama. Kettle on. 2 mugs. He looked once at the window and once at our faces and said, "I'll run you into town in the morning." We didn't argue. Letting the night interrogate you is how people get turned around twice in one experience. Morning makes liars or keeps records. He drove us back to the spot where I'd thrown the food bag and where we'd cut for open water. We walked in a straight line, eyes on where we put our feet. Just beyond the point, in damp leaf litter and shallow mud, we found tracks. At first, human enough in shape, but the stride length changed midline. 3 long, 1 short, like the leg length itself had shifted in motion. 10 feet up a birch, a fresh break hung like a bent elbow, the pale tear-marked with tooth scars. Flat even, too regular for a deer, too high for a person not on a ladder. The old man exhaled through his nose, the sound of someone seeing what they expected and didn't want. He didn't say a name. He didn't tell us a country story. We didn't ask for one. He drove us to our truck. We paid cash for the trailer haul, even though he tried to wave it off. The food bag was gone. Something small we'd seen earlier. A fish carcass set on a rock near the first carry, the way a person lays out a tool they intend to pick up, found a new weight in my head. On the way out, the old man watched the tree lean more than the road, not nervous, just measuring the distance between the world he knows and what people say they know until late October tests them. I'm back every summer because this place is braided into my life. But I write different routes when the calendar tips toward real cold. I don't line up a landing after twilight. I don't bring a canoe within talking distance of a last campsite if the person in the trees has a smile that turns off like a light and breath that doesn't steam when mine does. Call it campfire drama if you want. I don't need a convert. I need you to remember one rule if that voice ever asks for a ride from the edge of knife at last light. Angle for open water. Keep your cadence like a metronome. Throw what you can spare. Don't look back until your bow grinds gravel under a real light, held by a real hand, and you can see breath leave a human mouth. That's the whole plan. That's how we got out. The rest can stay on shore where the shortcuts live. I'm a visiting climber out of Ohio. My partner that week, Tyler, grew up in Kentucky and spends most weekends in the red. We'd spent the afternoon at Left Flank and Bruise Brothers, burned our fingertips on sandstone, and packed up feeling like responsible adults for once. Taped skin, empty wrappers, quick stretch, trash out. It was a weekday in late October, half-empty lots, air cool enough that chalk actually mattered. Tyler said, "Let's chase a sunset," and pointed us toward a small arch he remembered somewhere off Tunnel Ridge Road. Not one of the famous spans, quieter, he said. A short detour off a social trail where you could see the sky go orange, back to the car before headlamps mattered. I had a half coil of rope in my pack and a working lamp. Tyler kept a few nuts and small cams racked to his harness out of habit and carried a water bottle that thumped his thigh when he walked. No map. No GPX track. The plan was the casual kind that works until it doesn't. Park off Forest Service Road 39, follow a thin path toward the Star Gap country, stay high, let the ridges do the pointing. I trusted him, and I trusted the terrain. I thought I'd learned to read. That combination almost put us over a cliff. We stepped off the gravel around 5. Late fall light throws long lies. Every shadow looks deeper than it is. The first stretch felt fine. Sandstone plates underfoot, laurel crowding the edges, a narrow spine dropping fast both sides. Tyler called landmarks like a tour guide. Shallow rock house on the left, a split rail fallen into gray threads, a fin of stone with a notch you could heel hook if you were bored. He said he knew the first half by heart and could dead reckon the rest. I didn't argue. I should have. The first wrong thing came 20 minutes in. On a stump beside the path, a fresh deer hide lay spread smooth, flesh side up, like someone had started a tanning job and walked away mid-sentence. No camp. No fire ring. No carcass. No tarp. The hair still had that shine it loses fast in dirt. We didn't touch it. 10 paces later, a wooden post that used to hold a trail marker had its face scraped flat and re-etched with long vertical grooves. No numbers, no blazes, just tallies, each cut clean like a chisel pass. The skin on my forearms prickled before I'd decided how I felt. Ridge after ridge, saddle after saddle. Light drained from the hollows first. Distance got shorter every step. At 6:10, with the sun grazing the treetops, we hit a tangle of faint paths and thick laurel. Tyler stared down each one and pointed east at a low dome of rock like he recognized it. I said we were burning daylight, and that turning back wasn't cowardice. He nodded. We pivoted. This way, a voice said, close and flat, from ahead past the leaves. An orange safety vest hung between 2 trunks like a marker. Above it, a brimmed hat. No tool, no pack, no radio. The vest moved a few yards and stopped where the path narrowed. Tyler raised his tone just a notch, friendly but not soft. What fire road does that connect to? A pause long enough to be a choice. The nearest, the voice said. The vest drifted farther, always a few yards ahead, always waiting again when we closed the gap, as if it slid through brush without catching a twig. Our boots made dry leaf noise. Whatever wore the vest didn't. We asked if he was with the Forest Service. Another beat. I work out here. No name. No area closure. No follow-up question, none of the little scripts you hear from real staff. We stayed high because that's the rule that keeps you alive in the gorge. Bare plate over duff, trees for brakes, stone for footing. The vest kept angling us toward a shallow sandstone bowl that read safe from above and turned into bands of cliff as soon as you committed. A natural amphitheater where leaf litter slides on hardpan to a polished lip and then the ground goes modern art. A known dusk trap. I leaned close and used the word I grew up hearing in Appalachian families when conversation went quiet and someone drew a shape in the air like a warning. Skinwalker. Tyler didn't look at me. He said louder, we're bailing to the road, and tried to take the lead. We couldn't get in front. Each time we moved to pass, the vest was already where we meant to go, standing at the next bend, on the far side of a slab, brim hiding the face. It never waved. It didn't crowd. It let our own choices carry us to the lip. At the edge, it finally faced us. I didn't get a clean look at the face, just shadow under the brim. Proportions wrong in a way lists do better than metaphors. Arms a touch too long in the vest holes. A neck that let the head tilt far past normal. Posture that didn't shift with breath. The right arm lifted and made a slow after-you motion, palm down, dropping like a traffic cop. No words. No warning about the cliff. Just direction. Climbers do what climbers do when the ground goes suspect. Tyler stepped to a car-sized boulder, set a nut in a constriction, clipped a sling, weighted it. You could hear Grit whisper as the sling loaded. He didn't like it, neither did I. He unweighted, yanked the nut back clean, coiled the sling in his hand, and we both eased away from the drop. The head tilted farther until the brim touched the shoulder. It held there too long, like range mattered more than use. We decided to skirt the bowl, staying on bare plate where rubber bites, and where we wouldn't leave a clean track in the leaf duff. It's slow moving like that, edge to edge, testing sand for ball bearings. Our talk turned to route voice. Good. Left higher. 2 steps to weeds. Down in the leaves, something matched us. Not footfalls, more a sliding sound that never snagged. When we paused, it paused. When we hopped a gap, it didn't struggle. It was already waiting where our line would spit us out. There's a narrow saddle out there regulars use as a shortcut when they're off trail. It leads to a 10-foot down climb, belly over, drop to a ledge, then a slanted ramp funneling into a gully that trends toward the road. Tyler found it from memory. The last 20 yards to the saddle were the longest of my life because once we committed to the down climb, we'd be out of sight for a few seconds. I pitched the rope first so my hands were free. It hit the ledge and unrolled. The vest stepped to the edge above us and looked down at the rope like it hadn't seen one used before. That fixed attention felt worse than anything else, like it was learning us. I kept my chest on the stone, slid feet first. Forearms burned. Shoes scraped. Tyler moved next. When I reached the ledge, a hand came over the rim. Fingers unbent farther than they should have, long and straight, like bark peeled and pulled end to end. It held that shape and didn't reach. We didn't wait for curiosity to become proximity. We crabbed down the ramp and took the gully at a half run, because sometimes fear only converts to sense if you let it become movement. The parallel sound above faded and reappeared, now along the rim, now across a ridge like it moved on a map we didn't own. A few times I looked up and saw the vest one ridge over, same distance, never scrambling, never sweating, just present. Water found the gully's line, the slope eased, the air changed. You can feel when a road is near even in the dark. The uniform breaks, a kind of manufactured emptiness. We followed it. We spilled onto gravel like people stepping out of a river. I actually threw up, adrenaline dumping out like bad fuel. Headlights crested a bend. We planted in the center and waved. Older Chevy. County plate. Driver rolled down slow. Fleece with an emblem I recognized. The voice of a man who used to run into smoke. "You boys all right?" We gave him the minimum truth that fits daylight. He keyed a dash radio to a local channel and told someone he'd picked up 2 hikers near Tunnel Ridge who'd been led toward a bad drop by a man in a vest. No lecture. Lot near Oxier Ridge and Double Arch. A ranger met us, calm, professional, no appetite for drama. Short questions, where, when, vest details, tools, insignia. No tools. No name tag. We told him about the deer hide and the tally post. He wrote, nodded, said he'd document in daylight. 2 days later a note came back. Vandalized post with vertical grooves. Scraped stump with hide remnants, logged for cleanup. No sermon. Just facts. We still climb the red. Routes are worth the miles. But dusk is a hard cutoff now, not a suggestion. If one of us says turn around, we turn. Tyler replaced the sling he almost left. I kept the one he yanked, twisted from that quick pull, looped on a peg by my gear bag. Not lucky, just a reminder. High ground, in your own judgment beat any guide you can't vet. If you're out near Tunnel Ridge on a weekday evening in late October, and someone you can't quite see keeps appearing where you're already headed, don't let politeness or pride set your feet. Pick stone over duff. Pick the road over the story. And if a vest ever gestures you forward without words, step back like the edge is already under your toes. Listen, if you ever hike Lost Valley in early November, tattoo 3 rules into your head. Keep a 30-yard sight line, make a sharp noise before blind turns, and keep moving toward people. Don't debate. Don't argue with timing that's off by half a beat. Learn from my morning with my dad. The day we went to see elk and ended up running basic survival drills on a trail that should have been boring. I was home for a long weekend. I'm 24, Dad's 54, we've done easy trails forever. Dawn found us in Boxley Valley, breath steaming from the bulls and from us. Calves tucked close to cows along the fence line, the kind of postcard Arkansas uses to seduce you. Traffic thinned with the sun. We drove 5 minutes to Lost Valley, plan simple as hell. Follow Clark Creek, peek a side hollow, be back by early afternoon. Phones off. Paper map. 2 waters. Layers. Headlamps because we're not idiots. Dad clipped a whistle to his chest strap. My rescue inhaler lived, like always, right at the top of my day pack. We started around 9:30. Fog shredded from the pasture, the cool felt clean. The first stretch is wide and friendly. Limestone underfoot, cedar and hardwoods shouldering the sky, bluffs stacking to the right. Clark Creek on our left, clear enough to count pale stones. We talked family nonsense I'd been dodging and settled into a pace that let us breathe through our noses. The first wrong thing looked like nothing. On a damp slab beside the creek, a crisp right boot print, lug pattern sharp, outer edge heavier like the wearer rolls a little. 10 yards later, same rock type, same print, but mirrored. Not a left boot. The same right boot, flipped like a stamp pressed in reverse. It sat in my head like a tiny nail you tell yourself didn't pierce skin. We stepped into a side hollow that caught sun higher up. Leaf mat for a floor. In the middle, someone had pressed a pile of wet leaves into an oval and dragged something with 2 parallel lines across it. Tine space too neat for random. For thin sticks laid beside it in a row, like tally marks for a test no one explained. The line broke off. No art. No message. Just placed, held gone. We were angling back to the main track when he stepped out of a cedar thicket, 3 body lengths off trail. Canvas jacket with a hood up, cuffs damp. Gray hiking pants with no knee dirt. That's the kind of thing your brain grabs when it wants normal and can't find it. He nodded past us toward the meadows. You see the herd? Teeth squared and clean, not meeting quite right. Not a gap, like his jaw stopped early. Yeah, earlier, Dad said in his chat with stranger's voice. Chin lift. Polite. He pointed us down trail without inviting conversation. The man didn't push. He fell in behind us, shoes whisper soft on leaves. Each time I checked back, he was farther than he sounded. Each time I faced forward and walked, his steps came in little clusters, then nothing. Not quiet. Wrong. Dad knelt to fix a lace. The man closed to conversational distance and asked me, like we'd been mid-talk, "You still keep your inhaler in the top of your pack?" "I do." I hadn't used it. I hadn't mentioned it. My hand went to the zipper on reflex. Dad rose fast, palm firm on my shoulder, eased me half a step behind him. "We're turning back," Dad said. Polite, final. The man tipped his head toward a faint sketch of path that hugged the rock wall. "I'll show you a better loop." There was one narrow track. It was the one under our boots. We looked at it. We looked up. He was already ahead a dozen paces, planted at a pinch where the bluff pushes the trail toward the water. You could not pass without brushing him. My throat went dry. "Skinwalker," I said to Dad. One word, low and clean so there's no pretending I meant something else. His face lost color. No folklore argument. No lecture. He touched the whistle like a checklist, nodded once. We didn't run. We didn't play tough. We took ground that belonged to us, open stone. The creek bed ran in pale slabs, slick in sheets but honest. We cut to it. Cold crept over our ankles, then arches. It kept our heads from inventing drama. Dad hit 3 sharp blasts before the next blind bend. The man flinched late, not a normal startle, a full beat after the echo died. Shoulders jerked like he'd practiced the motion and missed his cue. He tried to land in front of us again, straight through cedar, appearing already facing the direction we were going, not where he'd come from. He crouched under branches he could have walked under, stretched tall over brush he could have stepped across. Like an actor swapping shapes to hit marks that didn't exist. We stuck to the rules. Sightline first. Sound before blind turns. Keep moving. Dad's whistle cracked air at every choke. I watched for the late flinch and got it, over and over, the same offbeat drum. The shallow cascade pinched the creek. 2 short sheets of water over pale rock, exit squeezed hard against the bank. If you wanted to intercept someone, you'd choose that spot. I stepped up, my shoes skated, knee-kissed stone. Not cinematic, stupid pain, eyes wet, a second gone. The man was 3 long strides away on the bank, hands loose, chin lifted like he'd dialed in a height. Dad didn't yell. He ripped his stainless bottle off the strap and threw it at the slab right of the man's shoulder. It rang, sharp metal against bluff. The head snapped toward the sound after the ring was dead. Hands open late. That was our window. Dad hauled my pack strap, shoved me across the lip. 2 ugly steps, then open. We didn't sprint. Sprinting dies in 100 yards. We kept a pace that made my teeth click. Every time sight died, Dad blasted 3. Every time I looked, the man's reactions lagged like a bad dub. The trail widened. The lot showed, gravel rectangle, pale sedans, muddy Subarus. A seasonal ranger stood by a green rig, clipboard in hand. Her head came up. Her face didn't do a single stupid thing. Dad said, "Someone's following." Knows things he shouldn't. Emergency tone. She keyed her radio without looking away from the trail mouth, gave a compact description. Male, hooded jacket, gray pants, odd effect, approaching hikers. Names. What he said. I told her the inhaler line. She wrote it, pen digging dark. Another ranger jogged in from the lower lot, even pace, hand on a whistle. He disappeared up trail and came back minutes later, breathing steady. Heard talking off trail, he said. Not a conversation. Words spaced wrong. Short, flat. No campfire bullshit. We drove to the sheriff's substation in Ponca. The deputy had a lined face and a voice that doesn't flinch. Dot on a wall map. 2 more questions that told me other dots exist. No story offered. During the rut, he said, we get calls where folks hear elk and hear something trying to match people too. You did the right things. No chase. No heroics. Small changes. My inhaler lives in my jacket now. a spare ride's in the glove box. I finished a self-defense class until my hands could do things without my brain's permission. Dad added grip sleeves to our bottles and a second whistle to the car. We still hike. We go early. We stay on marked trails. And we don't step into that side hollow again. If a man with squared teeth that don't quite meet asks if you saw the herd, and his footsteps arrive in clusters then go dead, don't give him your day. Take stone. Make sound. Keep moving till you see plate numbers and green trucks and radios that actually chirp. That's how you get back to your car, file the report, and live to be bored by a safe trail again. We'd only pulled off the highway to let the dogs stretch their legs and shake the road out of our knees. Arizona's light does this thing near afternoon. Everything is copper and blood orange, a mirage you can almost peel. We dropped into a sandy draw, juniper and rabbit brush hemming the wash, and that's when we saw him on the ridge. An older dine man in black, shirt, trousers, hair tied back, cut sharp against the sky like a petroglyph had stepped off the rock. He didn't wave. He didn't even blink. Just that stern, carved scowl like he'd been waiting. "Sorry, friend, we didn't know this was private," I called up. My voice felt thin in that big air. He didn't answer. His mouth moved anyway, the way a storm moves on the horizon. It wasn't talking. It was something closer to a rhythm, bones and breath keeping time. There's a word for sound that makes your body remember you're mostly water. Whatever he was doing was that. We backed out of the wash with our hands up like idiots leaving a card table, and we didn't look back. By the time we reached the Airbnb, stucco box with a leaning mesquite in front, 2 bedrooms, a patio of sun-bleached flagstone, it was full dark. We made a bad nest of pizza boxes and playlists. The dogs passed out with their paws twitching in dreams. There was the easy, messy energy of vacation, the exaggerated stories, the guilty doom scrolling, the flirty laughter you pretend not to hear from the hallway. Not drunk, couldn't even buy anything stronger than gas station coffee out there, but buzzed on altitude and exhaustion and the thin thrill of being somewhere you don't belong. Then something coughed outside. I turned the music down. A black dog stood just beyond the porch light. It was big, not freak big, but heavy in the chest with coat too clean for a res stray. Its eyes were a dull, stained yellow, and even through glass I caught a whiff that wasn't dessert, soured meat and penny iron. "Hey, check it," I said. "Local dog," Tommy yawned, draping himself on the window like he was posing for a record cover. "Probably wants crusts." The dog turned and trotted along the house. I moved to the bedroom window, then the kitchen, then the tiny bathroom where the light flickered once and steadied. The dog slipped past the corner, and by the time I made it back to the living room, it had become the man in black, standing in the exact pool of light where the dog had stood. Same silhouette, same stillness, same rotten metal breath, somehow leaking through the walls. He was chanting again. Not loud. Not a shout. The kind of volume you use to tell secrets across a pillow. I shouldn't have been able to hear it, but my ears rang like I'd stood too close to a speaker. My vision pulsed at the edges. Suddenly I had a headache that felt like somebody had reached in and pinched the soft center of my skull. The last clear thing I remember is the front door latch clicking by itself. Morning burned my eyes open. We were scattered across the tile, like we'd tried to build a human barricade and failed. The dining table lay on its side. Somebody's phone had bled battery in a corner, light still faintly on. The front door hung open. On the concrete and across the threshold, prints. Not tracks like a dog ran through a puddle and made a mess, but deliberate, single-file paw marks laid down with care, black and greasy as if they'd been painted in soot and tallow. They went everywhere, into the hallway, along the kitchen counter, around the dog's empty bowls. One clean, oily smear cut across the living room window at mouth height, a long arc that looked disturbingly like a tongue dragged slow along glass. Nobody joked. My head felt hollowed out. Tommy threw up in the sink. The smell was worse inside than out now, sweet rot threaded with something musky and human, like old sweat baked into fabric. We stripped the sheets and still couldn't shake it. That day was shot. Sightseeing became lying around in dim rooms, the dogs shivering despite the heat. It felt like a hangover with none of the fun, nausea, cottonmouth, a slow spin if I stood too fast. When I did stand, the world swam like I'd lost a pint of blood. The smell baked into our clothes. It rode in the car. It came back at night with the dark. If I opened the curtains, the desert sat there, enormous and indifferent. If I closed them, I saw the man at the window anyway, His eyes not glowing, not dramatic, just flat with that dusty, lightless yellow that says predator and sickness in the same breath. We cut the trip short. On the highway, roadkill flashed by, ravens lifting, a slung tangle of leg bones, and I flinched like I'd been slapped. Back home the symptoms didn't bounce. They cratered. A week later I was gray and slow, as if somebody had quietly siphoned me. The urgent care doc pressed his lips together over the pulse ox reading and sent me in. Numbers came back and didn't make sense. I heard the word acute too many times. For units later, 5 iron drips, and I could finally climb a flight of stairs without seeing stars. Cause? Unknown. I had a couple of crescent bruises on my ribs I couldn't place, finger width, tender for days. We'd spent the day pretending our thighs weren't burning on the moguls at Taos, chasing the last stubborn strips of snow until the lifts shut down, and the sky went the color of an old bruise. After a gas station dinner that tasted like cardboard and regret, someone said hot springs, and the car hummed agreement. My buddy Brad used to live out here. He swore he could find black rock in the dark. We followed his tail lights off the highway and onto a rutted dirt road walled in with pinyon and juniper, past a lopsided junkyard full of sun-bleached hoods and the skeleton of a school bus, then down into the river valley where the Rio Grande turned into a strip of hammered tin under the moon. We crossed the narrow bridge and parked in a patch of mud that tried to eat my shoes. The night had that crisp, high desert bite that lives between your teeth. A few headlamps bobbed near the pools, the murmuring rise and fall of strangers soaking. 2 other dogs were milling off leash, tails up, hackles flirting with trouble. I kept my pup, Keenan, 6 months old and mostly legs, clipped to me. He didn't mind the leash. He did mind the air, sniffing like it had changed when we weren't looking. Brad went ahead to recon, and came back with his eyebrows doing a story. Found a vapor cave up there, he said, pointing to a gash of black cut into the slope. Swear a black cat jumped out of it. Somebody's Mauser, Tommy said, rolling his eyes. Or a shadow pretending to be interesting. The main group slipped out of the big pool, and we slid in, the heat biting then hugging, sulfur licking the back of the throat. There weren't spots for all of us. I hung back, restless. The cave yawned uphill like a dare. I tied Keenan's leash around a fat rock, double-knotted, kissed his head. Back in a minute, I promised the dog. He refused to look at me, which is how I knew he was upset with the plan. Inside, the cave breathed on me, wet, living air that smelled like boiled eggs and pennies. The rock had a slick, animal sweat to it. My headlamp picked out frost-white crystals, a crooked seam of timber like an old mine's mouth to the left, and a narrowing throat straight ahead. Somewhere water ticked. Somewhere else a soft whisper. Wind, I told myself. Wind through a hole. My foot slid, my shoulder kissed stone. I swore into the damp. Keenan's cry bounced down the passage. Not a hey whine. A we should leave now note. The cave tugged at my breath, and I let it go. When I crawled back into the night, the world seemed too wide. Stars poured across the sky like sugar. I untied Keenan. He pressed his head into my hip and grumbled at the dark. By the time I'd stripped down and sunk into the pool, one of the girls shouted that my dog had just gone into the cave. Nope, I called, sitting up too fast. From where they stood they couldn't see his line. He was right there, tied where I'd left him. But their faces didn't lose the look. We saw a big black dog, one insisted, pointing exactly where the cat had jumped, exactly where the air felt wrong. We laughed it off like people do when the laugh is a talisman. The moon slide ruled down the canyon wall. The water that had been medicine turned heavy. When we finally hauled out, skin steaming and pruned, a crow the size of a toddler exploded out of a juniper and flapped across our faces, scolding. Omens now, Brad muttered. The bird cut left toward the cave and vanished. The bridge thumped under the tires as we crept back up the road. The in-dash map showed our line like a breadcrumb trail, but the night folded the canyon into duplicate forks and dead ends. No bars on anyone's phone. No wind. The engine sounded like it was swallowing its own tongue. Keenan started a growl that lived in his bones and climbed into the car like a storm. He planted his front paws on the center console, eyes nailed to the windshield. I looked up and forgot how to breathe. It stepped out of the shadow and into the brights like it had been waiting for its cue. Humanoid if you were being generous, but only the cruelest kind of joke. Its legs bent wrong, the heels long and raked back like a deer's, the knees traveling the opposite way. Its arms hung low, too long by a hand, and then another, the fingers thin and ropey with nails like dry crow beaks. There were no features I could name, No nose, no mouth, just texture where they should be. But its head lifted, and something in me understood the gesture as a smile. Keenan lunged and barked in a register I'd never heard, voice tearing. I threw the car in reverse, so hard the transmission cried, and we juddered backward, smashing through potholes, rocks banging off the undercarriage like fists. The thing paced us easy, a shadow inside our light, eating the distance we made with a lazy, reaching gait. A coyote flashed across the beam, gray, ribs like harp strings, and I slammed the brakes. The world bucked. When I looked up, the road was empty. No coyote. No tall, wrong thing. The beam stabbed pinion and bare dirt, and the cut bank we'd somehow drifted inches from kissing. We didn't speak until the rental's headlights found the mud lot of our Airbnb, and the stucco house sat there pretending to be safe. Inside, the heater clicked inside. Keenan paced, front door, front door, window, hair standing in a ridge along his spine. The room had a hollow to it, the kind of silence that makes you aware of your heartbeat's smallness. Tap. All of us turned. The front door. Not a knock. A deliberate tap, the nail of a finger or the tip of a key. I went to the peephole. The porch light showed nothing but the top edge of the welcome mat and the bruised shadow of the mesquite. Keenan tore into the kitchen, barking 3 barks and then a broken whine. "Don't," Brad said when my hand went to the curtain. He was too late. I touched fabric. Keenan launched and closed his teeth around my wrist, not breaking skin, just holding, shaking his head hard enough to rattle my bones. He dragged my hand down. The curtain stayed put. Tap. Tap. Brad found a fireplace poker and yanked the curtain anyway. Empty patio, empty black. The roof boomed. Not someone running. Something heavy landing, pacing. The ceiling dust sifted in a slow, fine veil. Hooves, I thought stupidly, because the sound was that, a hollow thok-thok, then a pause, then a skittering reposition the way a goat finds a better purchase on a ledge. There was a square skylight over the little sitting area, and we looked up because of course we did, and it was there, the wrong face above the glass. The eyes were holes in the dark, so black they swallowed the light around them and made new dark. Where a mouth should have been was a tight slit that peeled back to show needles. It fogged the glass with a hiss, and the fog smelled like a wet animal that had slept in a slaughterhouse apron. Headlights washed the walls. Our missing friends laughing out of the car, music faint. I looked back up, and the glass was a mirror again, just our white, stunned faces looking small. They didn't believe us until the taps started again, soft, patient, circling the house like a child learning a song. It went on for hours, between the windows, at the vents, once against the pipes under the sink, so that the sound traveled through the drain like whispers. We coasted into sleep the way people pass out after a fever, spent, papery. We used to drive down in a rattling caravan from Denver like we were bringing weather with us. Dust off I-25 still in our hair, coolers rattling, a bed of mismatched tools clanking in the back. Black Mesa was a long exhale after the city. We helped where we were told to help, patching a Hogan roof with fresh poles and mud, hauling water, mending fences, and, on the best days, herding sheep on horseback across a scabbed gold of desert. I'd only ever ridden nose-to-tail trail ponies before. Out there, the horses and the land felt like they had an arrangement that only tolerated me if I kept my mouth shut. One trip bled into another. On the Hopi side, a friend took us up to Second Mesa, and we stood on flat rooftops as the Kachina dancers moved below, footfalls like low thunder in a storm still far away. Everyone around me knew when to clap, when to hush, when to look down. I followed their lead and kept my camera pocketed. Later we ate fry bread and mutton stew at his mom's house. I was one of the only white people there, and that was a good reason to be quiet and learn. The sun slid off the mesa like a coin into a fountain, and we drove back toward the Navajo Nation in a road that smelled like juniper and cooling stone. By the time we reached the Hogan that night, it was almost full dark. Our group stowed tools and drifted into little clusters, someone fiddling with a camp stove, someone else stretching their back. My buddy and I took a short walk to let the dust settle in our lungs. We'd only gone 100 yards when we heard it, that heavy, hollow drumbeat of hooves coming fast, gallop, gallop, too close and too loose to be a rider, too intentional to be a wild horse spooked by coyotes. The sound came from our left, then our right, and then nowhere, the way water in a pipe seems to run uphill. "Back to camp," my buddy said, already moving. We did. The coyotes we'd heard earlier lilted a chorus somewhere far off. Their voices made the stars feel sharper. A horse whinnied near the tents once we crawled in. We laughed it off as nerves, but checked the guy lines anyway. In the morning, prints circled our tent, big, clean, deep marks like a horse had paced a slow ring around us while we slept. No drag marks from a lead rope. No human boot prints. We worked that day as the sun hammered the metal tools too hot to hold. Biting flies tormented the backs of our calves and found their way under our shirts. We tuned the car radio to NPR and let calm voices read the world to us. By evening, the sky hoisted up a full moon like a lantern. We cooked a communal dinner, talking and teasing as the smell of beans and charred onion curled into the air. Someone passed me a plate, and I dug in without thinking. A few bites in, our community mentor stepped up with a voice that thudded harder than a scolding. We'd forgotten to set out a spirit plate, food set aside for those who aren't seen to eat first. We apologized. Sincerely. He accepted. But the mood dipped. Shame is a pebble that keeps rolling. We took our post-meal walk out of habit. The night had that crisp sugar glow a big moon gives a desert. 50 yards from camp, the gallop came again, closer, like it had been waiting beyond the edge of the sound. This time we didn't retreat. We stood in a pocket of shade cast by a pinyon and breathed as quietly as we could. A snort huffed the branches in front of us. We leaned to see, and something stepped out. You know how your brain will grab the closest available word and hold it up wrong, like a kid trying on a parent's coat? Mine tried horse. It had the length of neck, the long face, the suggestion of a mane. But it stood upright on two back legs like a man who had practiced walking in hooves and finally gotten cocky. It cocked its head, and a smile moved where a horse shouldn't have a smile, the lips folding in ways lips shouldn't. The eyes were not a horse's big wet brown. They were shiny black buttons recessed into pale lids, focused like a person's, mean as a dog's. It was 10 feet tall if it was an inch. The torso was too human in the middle, broad chest, the suggestion of a stomach seam where skin shifted, and its arms ended in hands, not hooves. Fingers. Stained. Around its neck and wrists, turquoise flashed in the moonlight. The chest bore ink, dark, deliberate lines like tattoos I didn't understand and didn't dare to. The smell hit then, sweat and copper and something old left in the sun too long. It huffed again and took 2 slow steps, balancing the way a dancer does, hips leading. We ran. It came at us in a lunge that folded in too many places. I went down hard, knee-biting gravel. The thing leaned, reaching with those 2 short fingers, mouth opening to show teeth not made for grass. I threw a kicking heel into its shin. Bone met bone, and the jolt rattled my teeth. Dirt in the eyes worked for me once against a bully in 8th grade. Old tricks return when you're afraid. I scraped a handful and flung it. The creature reared back, mouth clacking shut on air hard enough to make a sound like snapping antler. We sprinted for the truck. The engine turned and didn't catch. Once. Twice. The 3rd try was just a pathetic whine. We locked the doors out of reflex, childish, but it felt like something to do. The creature stepped into the headlight wash and drove its crown, its horseman face, into the passenger door with a thud that made the window quiver. I tasted pennies. We bolted from the driver's side and dove into the tent instead, an instinct that made no sense except that thin fabric between us, and that thing felt better than bare air. We zipped the flap. We became kids again. Sleeping bags pulled to chins, breaths counted, names whispered like prayers. Outside, the sound began, a low chant threaded with animal growls, rhythm perfect as a drum line, patient as someone counting down. A gun cracked once. Not close, but not far. The chanting stopped mid-syllable. Then hooves, this time unmistakable, fled into distance. We stayed zipped and small until dawn soaked the tent walls to gold. Our Navajo host came mid-morning with calm eyes and tired lines around them. Out of respect, I won't use his name, but I will remember his words. We'd angered a spirit. He'd fired a bullet dipped in ashes to drive it off. We did not ask the recipe for that protection. We did not ask its name. Some doors you don't knock on. We packed quick, working quiet. Before we rolled, I palmed the dent in the truck door where a skull had tried to force its way into our world. Cool metal. Shallow crater. A fingerprint from the other side of the line. We headed north with the radio off, the mesa in the mirrors growing small, and I practiced not looking back.